You too. What's going on? Welcome to Mose Knows. I'm your host, Mose, and we're back with a new series. Guess what? We are this much closer to the start of the NFL season because training camps kick off this week. There are teams that are reporting today as we speak into training camp. So you know it's time. You team are in the process of building their rosters. We have veterans looking to get back into the fold. We've got free agents at new teams looking to be ingrained in the culture. We got rookies trying to make a name for themselves. We got guys on the roster bubble who are trying to make the 53-man roster. It's an exciting time of the year. We're that much closer to football. And we're going to get started in this new series, man. We're going to do a state of the franchise training camp preview for all 32 teams. And you see the title of this video, you know where we're starting. I'm going to hit you with a brief intro and we'll jump right into the show. See you in a sec. Know-it-alls, welcome into the show. We have an exciting show for you. We're starting in this series, State of the Franchise, Training Camp Preview. We're starting with the Baltimore Ravens. No rhyme or reason. We have no, outline of where we're going with this series. We're just picking teams and we're going. And we decided to go with the Baltimore Ravens because we have a very, very special guest in the house. He is a Baltimore sports aficionado covering the Ravens and the Baltimore Orioles, YouTube content creator, and the co-host of the new Ravens Vault podcast, your new go-to place for all things Baltimore Ravens. My guy, Bobby B, aka Cheddar Bob, aka Bobby Tea Time, Bobby Baltimore. You see it. Bobby Trosset's in the building. Bobby, welcome to Mose Knows. How you doing today, man?
Man, Mose, that was a heck of a promo there. We're gonna have to get you around for some more podcast promotions as we get this thing off the ground. But yeah, certainly appreciate you having me on, and let's talk some Baltimore sports because, as you mentioned, as we currently sit here, I'm watching on this webcam that I have set up. I'm watching Ravens players show up to camp. So it is that time of year. The first full practice is coming up tomorrow on the 27th, and look, when you play football, and you know this being in college athletics, whether it's soccer, football, or any other fall sport for that matter, summer ends a little bit early. But although it's bittersweet, it gets me fired up because it's right around the corner. Sundays are going to be fun again.
Absolutely. It's Sundays, Monday nights, Thursday night. It's going to be an amazing time. I love this time of year. That's why I got into, content creation. I talk football all the time. My wife is annoyed because I'm always talking football. Me and her dad, my father-in-law, we've built a great relationship just as father and son, but also over sports. He's a big football fan and he'll call me more than he calls her just to talk football. So it's an amazing time of year. I love it. Talking about my beginnings, just give the folks here at Mose Knows a brief intro into who you are and what it is that you do as far as your content creation and reporting on all things Baltimore sports.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate that. In March of 2022, just a few months ago, I left local radio in Baltimore after 3 years serving as the pre and post game show anchor and host for Ravens radio. And so while those were great opportunities and certainly a big break for me professionally, having moved from DC freshly mid college to take that job, I just felt like it was time to pivot. The way that we consume content is changing, as you well know, being that you've taken a dive headfirst into content creation as well on this channel. But basically, I'm in the middle of building what I hope becomes the main hub for Baltimore sports content creation and where folks go to consume such. So you mentioned at the top, I just rolled out my first ever podcast in Baltimore called The Ravens Vault with my co-host Sarah Ellison. She's got a ton of different experience with the Baltimore Ravens, actually as a team employee for over a decade. So she and I are looking forward to kind of partnering up. We already got several episodes out there across platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And our first guest was Ravens fullback Pat Ricard, which we just released this morning. And if you follow football, man, and you love the game and the way it's played hard and rough and tough nosed, you'll love Pat because not only is he one of the great fullbacks in the game, but he's just a great person. So check that out if you're interested in fullbacks, especially an undrafted fullback too, who is now signed his third contract in the NFL. Aside from that, though, I do a lot of content creation on YouTube as well. My tagline is Baltimore Sports and Beyond. So you alluded to it. While it's heavy Ravens this time of year, the Orioles are in the middle of an incredible resurgent rebuild. And so I've been focused on creating as much possible content around those two teams as possible. You know, Mose, this time of year, man, when they overlap, it gets very busy, but it's exciting. And I know you found me. You mentioned before we went on live on Facebook, and I think that's probably where I've had the most success. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I try to be as active as possible. But it's crazy. This digital world we're living in is wild, but I can't feel more motivated than I do right now to kind of go on, on my own. And that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. A great story. You have the passion for it. You listen. You have the voice for radio, and you were on radio for 3 years. I can hear it. So that will completely transition to the podcast space, into the YouTube space. And again, your passion for sports, your passion for reporting on what's happening, the day to day, the ins and outs of what's happening in sports. I think it's great with what you're doing, and I'm excited to kind of get your knowledge and your expertise about the Baltimore Ravens specifically. Again, you mentioned players are showing up right now to training camp. They're getting ready to start. So let's touch on a few areas. I want to start with the off season and what the Baltimore Ravens have done. I've always looked at the Baltimore Ravens as one of the top tier, classiest organizations in the NFL. They do things right, by the coaching staff, by the players, by the front office, by everybody in the building. They just do things the right way. And when you do things the right way, there's this thing that we call good karma. It just comes back to you. And I want to start with the draft, Bobby, because in the words of Peter Griffin, the Baltimore Ravens draft really grinded my gears. It really did. Because let's look at the first pick. How did Kyle Hamilton fall to 14 and the Ravens didn't have to move or do anything? They just let the board in front of them play out as it may. And then they get a gift. They draft number 14 at 14 in Kyle Hamilton. Talk about the acquisition of Kyle Hamilton in the draft and what this means for this Ravens organization.
Well, I think we got to start by tipping our cap to the great Ozzie Newsome, because although he's not general manager at this point in his career, which has been legendary on a number of accounts and really a multi type of Hall of Famer as both a player and an executive, he is still very much a part of this organization, and he is still very much in Eric DeCosta's ear. And so the way that he's instilled this draft philosophy in Baltimore as sort of this whole best player available versus need philosophy, I think has paid a lot of dividends over the years. And you saw it happen in 2020 in the second round early on, right? They're coming off the 2019 season, Mose, where they broke they shattered rushing records across the league for all 100 plus years of NFL history. And yet in the second round, with their first pick in that round, they go with J.K. Dobbins. And everybody's like, wait, what? And then a couple months later, he emerges as clearly the top rookie in the league, or at least one of the top rookies in the league. And I believe he ended up finishing the 2020 season with the most yards per carry among any rookies. And he beat out Mark Ingram. So you're thinking to yourself, damn, that was like the exhibit A of why you draft best player available versus need in certain situations. And although it's probably not as intense, this example with Kyle, I think it fits as well. They didn't necessarily need a safety at 14, but he fell to them. He was widely regarded as the top position player in his group in the entire draft, and they went and took a chance on him. And there's no chance to be taken. He's filthy. He's the truth. But you get the sense. They also knew they were going to have another pick. We didn't know at that time. They were going to have another pick later on in the round after dealing Marquis Brown to Arizona and then snagging who they feel, and they were mocked to originally at 14, which was so wild about this. Tyler Linderbaum, what they hope is a generational kind of talent in Linderbaum, and there he is right there, 65. So Anyway,
I-
I think,
that- let's
yeah, go
touch on
ahead.
that for a brief second because they trade Marquise Brown. And again, when you talk about an organization that is top of the class, um, they do go with best player available, but they also understand that if a player isn't happy or they don't want to be in the building, that it's best to move on. So an example of that is Orlando Brown. He wanted his opportunity to play left tackle. He wanted to go to a team and prove that he was left caliber the type of tackle in the NFL. And Baltimore said, you know what? We'll see if we can find a trade partner. We thank you for your services here. We wish you the best of luck. Same with Marquise Brown. Marquise Brown wanted to, try to find another situation where he could be used maybe more as a number one, as a true deep threat. Whatever the situation was in Baltimore, Baltimore said, you know what? We understand. We'll see if we can get something done. We appreciate your services here and we wish you the best of luck. And it just always seems to come back to them in such an amazing way. They trade Marquise Brown, they get the 23rd pick. Their guy is still on the board. They trade back from 23 to 25 with Buffalo because Buffalo wanted Kyer Elam, and they still get pretty possibly the best offensive lineman, at least the best center we know in this draft class. Talk about what he means to this offensive line, what he'll mean to, the continued maturation of Lamar Jackson with him being his center.
Well, first and foremost, you knew it was going to be a need of theirs with Bradley Bozeman departing to Carolina in free agency, which I think the majority of, Ravens Nation was bittersweet on. At the same time, he was going to be expensive, somewhat expensive, and as you've probably seen in recent weeks, the Ravens don't have until they've just restructured Marlon Humphrey's signing bonus and contract. They didn't have a ton of cap space to work with to begin with. So you knew it was a need going into the draft. But specifically, I think the familiarity with the Iowa program that Eric Acosta has was huge. Obviously, Marshall Yanda hails from Iowa. We know what he's meant. Most likely will be in Canton one day. And I just think that they had enough of a familiarity. They liked Tyler enough to take a chance on him with the 23rd pick. And then again, that's probably the wrong use of the word chance, right? They were mocked to him at 14 throughout the draft process. So it was a steal to snag him at 23. So I think he's a great fit for Baltimore. He is tough. He is humble. He is quietly going about his work. And I think that fits with the Baltimore fan base, right? Blue collar, gritty, tough nosed. I think he's going to be a great addition.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk about the the top four. We'll mention some of the later round guys. But David Ojabo out of Michigan suffered the Achilles injury working out in preparation for the NFL draft. Clearly a first round talent, was slated to go top 10, top 15. In Baltimore, you use the phrase "take a chance." I think with this one, you can say they definitely took a chance with this particular draft pick, knowing his potential. So we may not see him in the 2022 season, but what is the outlook that you see for David Ojabo in this defense in 2023 as the another pass rusher opposite Odafe Owe that we have in Baltimore?
Oh, he's got the potential through the roof, right? His ceiling, I'm not sure he even knows no bound. It even knows no bounds, and I think he's just a special player with a big motor, super explosive. And it was devastating to see what happened to him on his pro day, right? You got to go back to March. I mean, it was just several months ago. And so I think when it comes to a Jabo, tempering your expectations, when I say your, I think the Baltimore fan base is who I'm speaking to, will be important because they're saying out of Ravens camp within the last few weeks that an optimistic return could be in October. And I'm thinking to myself, why rush the guy back? I
Yeah,
know it's a position group that isn't as plentiful or stocked as you might want it to be, right? Tyus Bowser, his teammate, is also coming back from a torn Achilles. And Dafe Owe had shoulder surgery throughout the course of this offseason. So, I know that it's somewhat scarce, but if this guy, if you want him to pan out and not be rushed, then why try to set a timeline for him in October? Let's get him back when he feels he's ready. He still needs to adjust to the NFL, both physically, mentally, psychologically, all of those things. It's a big learning curve. So the way I've been saying it, Mose, is that hey, let's temper expectations. Let's slow the timeline down and allow him to come back at his own grace.
I agree with you 1,000%. I that's thank you for sharing that. That's the first time that I've heard that take where they're saying that it could be as early as October. But I agree with you 100%. I wouldn't rush him. Coming back from an Achilles is a difficult injury to come back from. It may be a little bit more difficult than a torn ACL just because there's so much research and it happens so frequently that guys are kind of more prepared to come back from a torn ACL than it was a torn Achilles. I remember when Richard Sherman tore his Achilles, the person that he reached out to wasn't even in the NFL. He reached out to Kobe Bryant to kind of figure out what was his regimen trying to get back into playing his sport at a high level. So I would not rush him. I wouldn't mind not seeing him at all this year. If I was, part of the Ravens fan base, if I was in the Ravens front office, because like you said, his potential is so high that his ceiling is so high, and he could be really really good in that defense as a pass rusher. I wouldn't want to kind of stunt his growth and get him in this injury cycle too soon. So I agree with you, man. And then the last guy we'll cover here in this topic, uh, nose tackle Travis Jones. Again, another Baltimore guy. He screams Baltimore Ravens through and through. What do you think his outlook is as a nose tackle within this defense?
Yeah, that dude's a beast. I think he's gonna be one of those guys that just like emerges as someone who earns, not gets, earns a lot more snaps on the defensive side of the football than maybe some fans are expecting, right? He wasn't that sexy pick. Maybe a lot of folks didn't know the name coming out of a program like UConn, but man, Mose, this dude is he's just a stuffer. He's a run stuffer. He clogs up middle lanes, right? And I think him and Michael Pierce, the thought of them kind of teaming up in the middle part of that Ravens defense is super exciting to me. And I think, with Brandon Williams no longer in the fold here as the Ravens nose tackle over the course of really the last several seasons in Baltimore, more than several. I think yes, he does have some big shoes to fill, and Michael will handle the majority of those replacement snaps in Brandon's sake there. But yeah, again, I think he is somebody that I'm going to be watching closely throughout camp because not many are talking about him, right? As a mid-round pick, not getting a lot of the notoriety that the Kyle Hamiltons, the Tyler Linderbaums, the David Ojabos garner. And I think that's exactly where he wants to be. Under the radar, come back and bite you when you least expect it.
Absolutely, man. What a solid draft for the Baltimore Ravens. And you think of guys like Isaiah Likely, Jalen Armour Davis, who I think is a sleeper, Daniel Falele. The Baltimore Ravens, like you said, with that aura of Ozzie Newsome still in the building, what he has instilled, the foundation that he's laid. Another solid draft for the Baltimore Ravens, and I'm jealous. I really am because that was I don't know if there was a better draft in my opinion this year than the Baltimore Ravens, what they were able to do. Um, let's touch on some of the free agents. We've got some new guys in the building, some guys who are already in the building. We got re-signed. You mentioned Patrick Ricard, Calais Campbell re-signed. Michael Pierce signed a new deal. We bring over offensive tackle Morgan Moses, re-signed Justin Houston, Kyle Fuller from the Chicago Bears and the Denver Broncos signs a 1-year deal. And the major signing was safety Marcus Williams coming over from the Saints on a 5-year, $70 million deal. Which one of these new Baltimore Ravens are you excited to see at the start of training camp?
That's where I was going to start. Where you ended, I was going to start with, and that's Marcus Williams. And that's the reason why a couple minutes ago I said that I didn't feel like safety was a huge need coming off the top of the draft at 14, right? Because Marcus was their big acquisition in free agency, to your point. So I think adding him into the fold, and Chuck Clark is a very capable, very versatile green dot wearing kind of guy for this this Ravens defense, and sort of the anchor. I think that's why it was such a surprise to me. At the same time, when you add in, the talent that Marcus is, and really the ball hawk that he tends to be, flying around and being the anchor, the true anchor of a defense. And really the first, like, I'm not comparing him to Ed Reed by any stretch of the imagination, but the way he plays the game, I think you can draw some comparisons to how Ed did back in his day. And I think, that bodes well for a Ravens defense that they hope is a no-fly zone again this year.
Yeah, you look at that secondary: Marcus Williams, Chuck Clark. You got Kyle Hamilton. You bring in Kyle Fuller, adding him to Marlon Humphreys and Marcus Peters, who's returning from injury. Wow, what a secondary! And I could understand why you would be excited to kind of get a guy like David Ojabo back. We know pass rush helps coverage, coverage helps pass rush. But if they can return to that no-fly zone type of defense and give that offense more opportunities to possess the ball, that's going to be an amazing thing to see for the Baltimore Ravens in the 2022 NFL season. So, and we're coming into training camp. We just mentioned Marcus Peters returning from injury. We also have J.K. Dobbins returning from injury. As somebody who's covering this team, give me some things that you want to see from these guys returning from injury to, help you or help the Ravens fan base be reassured that they're back, they're 100%, and they're ready to go for the 2022 season.
I think it's more about what I want to see from the folks that are making decisions for them when it comes to playing time and overall approach to this preseason stretch that we're about to embark on with camp beginning, right? Because what happened last year, sure, it wasn't anyone's fault per se, but should J.K. Dobbins have been playing in that Washington preseason game? Probably not. And
Nope.
so he doesn't tear his ACL there in Landover if he wasn't playing, obviously. Now, that's not to say it wouldn't have happened the prior week or the next week or whatever. And I don't want to go down that road because there's no sense in doing that. But I'd like to see them be set up for success over the next couple months, right? J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Ronnie Stanley, Marcus Peters are all beginning the season on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list. That doesn't mean they won't be ready for week one. It just means they're going to be very limited throughout the initial part of training camp. And I think that's smart and it's warranted. I don't want to see any of those guys in preseason play, Mose. I don't want to see Lamar play a snap until September 11th. And I think those small little things that can be decided by John Harbaugh and his staff will bode well for just a durability standpoint. And that's why they're bringing in bodies, right? Just yesterday, Corey Clement was signed as into the running back room, and folks were wondering why. There's now 7 total backs. Well, yeah, 2 of them are hurt on a PUP and trying to get back from their respective, torn ACLs from last year. Justice Hill has a torn Achilles that he's trying to work back from. And really, you just need training camp bodies this time of year. That's no disrespect to the guys that they signed. That's just how you get through a grueling training camp. So, I just want to see them be set up for success and give them their best shot of being ready come September.
Well said, Bobby. I couldn't have said it better myself. You mentioned Lamar Jackson. There's 2 things that I want to talk about here. One is the bulk up. Is it real? They say the camera adds 15 pounds, but having possibly seen him in person through, OTAs and minicamp, is the bulk up real? Is Lamar bigger, and how does that weight translate to his performance on the field from what you may have seen?
There's no question he's bigger. He has bulked up his neck and shoulders as they have been in recent years, but I really noticed it this year. They're just broader. They're more stout, and he's clearly been working. We know that he has shared a lot of what he's done this offseason with his training staff and his physical strength and conditioning staff that he has built around him down there in South Florida, which is very unusual for Lamar. He hadn't done that in the past. And you get the sense that he hears the noise. He hears all the junk that's being talked about him. And instead of going back at him, and sometimes he does, right? Chris Sims, Bernard Pollard, they both kind of got Lamar clapping back at them throughout the course of this offseason, which I found to be very entertaining. But he's just been kind of working quietly, right? Like scary hours, they call him in grind time. You know, he's up 10 to 15 pounds. Whether or not he will shed that weight off throughout training camp, which we all know in the Maryland area is brutal from a temperature standpoint, remains to be seen. But what I do know is that it doesn't look like his speed, based on the drills that I've seen, has been affected by this weight gain. And to me, from a durability standpoint, this makes him just even more lethal somehow. Imagine that in open space when he's vulnerable, when a play breaks down, when he is at his best, when he's most special. So to me, it's a phenomenal addition to his physique, and I think his health will bode well, come 2022.
Speaking of that, and his health and him being able to play, a majority, if not the entire season, and lead this team to a deep playoff run. Um, Talks of contract. We know that he himself does not have an agent, but he is in that realm of getting a new contract. His former teammate, former backup quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens, RG3, said that he should be a $50 million a year quarterback. So, one, do you agree with RG3's assessment? And two, how do you think these contract negotiations will work out with Lamar and the Ravens?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I always like to I always respect when reporters who are more plugged in than I am answer these types of questions by saying, first and foremost, we don't know, because no one knows. The folks that know, and of course, I'm talking about when this will be signed, if it will be signed, not the whole what he's worth, because I do think he's worth in that range, in that 45 to $50 million range. And we can talk about guaranteed money at another time, because obviously Kyler's the other day sort of reset the market, brought it back to, I mean, somewhat realistic categories, right? After that $230 million guaranteed by that. Well, I won't call the organization what I want it to, but ownership over there in Cleveland, it was just absolutely
Let's just say
mind-boggling.
division rival.
Yeah, it's a division rival, and how about a questionable decision? We'll put it that way.
We'll put it
But
that way.
but the moral of the story here is that Lamar's made it pretty clear that talks have ramped up in recent months, but he seems pretty poised, pretty content to potentially play this year without a long-term deal locked in. Now, obviously, the fifth-year option is kicking in this season, and so it goes from, like, I don't know, a couple million in terms of his salary to 23, just north of 23 million, which is life-changing money. But it's not generational type of money, which we all know he is worth and he has earned. So it is scary when you think about it that way, with the way he plays the game with reckless abandon. It's electric, it's special, but he showed last year that he is human. That's what we learned last year. And while they weren't necessarily hits that he sustained when he was, quote, on the run, it was sort of like being flushed out of the pocket because of his lack of offensive line. He's still human. And so, with that in mind, as somebody who just cares about the guy and loves watching him play, you got to wish, you got to hope for a long-term deal to be locked in at some point throughout training camp when the two sides are close in the same building, easily accessible. But like I said, Mose, no one knows. He's bet on himself for years now. Why change anything now? We know this is as unique of a situation as there is in professional sports, maybe all time, without an agent, being represented by his mother and the folks that they've put around him in his camp. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. It's always a touchy situation when you're talking about contracts and you're talking about people getting signed. Like you said, he is one of the generational talents who deserves that big contract. He's earned it. He's former NFL MVP. He's taken his team into the playoffs. He's been on the cover of Madden, which usually doesn't count for anything in contract negotiations, but your accolades and what you do on the field as a player, that speaks highly of what you're able to do as a player. So I do think he deserves it. Him betting on himself this year, like you said, 23 million is life changing money, but you want to lock him up and make sure that he is taken care of, and that way, once you have his number on your books, anything else outside of that, you're able to manipulate and figure out to ensure that you're building the best possible team that you can around him. As you mentioned, last year some issues on the offensive line. We definitely want to make sure that we shore those up so that once they do come to a deal, that he's insured and that they're insured that their investment is protected. Bobby, I've had you long enough. I wanted to touch on some position camp battles, but really with this team, there aren't that many holes that need to be filled. There are definitely some second and third and fourth string guys who are vying to make this 53-man roster. So give me any position camp battles that you are really keen to watching during this upcoming training camp, and then any other things that are piquing your interest that you're excited about, or that you're keeping your eye on for the Baltimore Ravens 2022 training camp.
Yeah, sure. I think there's two things that off the top of my head, come first, and that's the offensive line on the left-hand side. Who's going to win the left guard job, right? Is it going to be Ben Powers, who started 12 games for them last year? Is it going to be the second-year player in Ben Cleveland out of Georgia, who a lot of folks are high on? He's like the sexy fan pick, but hasn't necessarily won the job or been available consistently enough through one season in the NFL. Or perhaps could it be Tyree Phillips, who is probably the front runner at this point to earn that starting job? And then I think, right next to them, probably the biggest story aside from Lamar in throughout the entire organization is what will be made of Ronnie Stanley's return. He has not played since the Vegas Raiders game last year, and that was the regular season opener when he tried to give it a go, coming off that brutal ankle injury that he sustained back in. I think you got to go back to like November of 2020. It was like less than 24 hours after he signed his deal. So for his sake, thank goodness, right? But like, it's been tough to see somebody go from like an all pro caliber left tackle to almost a shell of himself. So I'll be watching that closely to see what kind of, durability and flexibility and dexterity he has in that ankle, because boy, he's a big dude, and there's a lot of weight that's being kind of pressured on those ankles. So he's Lamar's blind spot, and he is extremely important to this offense. And they were not the same without him last year. That's not shocking to anybody. You lose an all pro, and obviously you're going to be very different. So those are two things that I'm looking at. But Ronnie Stanley's return could very well, bring this offense one way or the other.
Absolutely, man. It's going to be interesting to see. So we're going to make sure that here at Mose Knows that we keep in touch with you to figure out what's exactly going on with Ronnie Stanley, with the return of some of these other players, with these the rookies coming into the fold, man. Bobby Baltimore, aka Bobby Trosset, thank you so much for your time today and jumping in here and spending some time here at Mose Knows. Just give the people where they can find you, how they can get in touch with you and tap in with your content. I'll also leave all that information in the description of this video, but just give them where they can find you. I got your Instagram pulled up here.
Appreciate the love, man. And again, thanks for reaching out. I'm impressed with what you're building here for sure, and do appreciate that invite. But yeah, I mean, there's a different number of different areas that you can find me. Like we said at the top, we just launched a podcast, myself and my co-host Sarah Ellison this week. It's called Ravens Vault. You can check that out really wherever you get your podcasts. I think Apple and Spotify are kind of the two most popular ones, but check that out. YouTube is where I churn out a bunch of content as well. Matter of fact, as soon as we finish this up, I'm going to be releasing a video on this whole anonymous defensive coordinator quote that kind of disrespected Lamar and kind of the whole sports world, including LeBron jumping down his throat at Lamar's back, which was cool to see in response. We'll have that coming out. You can just type in my name to YouTube and it comes right up, Bobby Trosset. That's Trosset. And you can pretty much find me on every single social media outlet, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube by just searching my name as well. So enjoy football season, man. Would love to stay in touch with you. And thanks again for reaching out.
Absolutely. We've got to do this again. Thank you for your time today. Guys, for your Baltimore Ravens content, Ravens Vault, Bobby Trosset on Twitter, Bobby Baltimore with 2 E's on Instagram. So go to Bobby's channel, go to his outlet, get all of your Ravens news, then come back to Mose Knows to get all of your NFL news. We got you covered for the entirety of the 2022 NFL season and beyond. Love and appreciate all of you guys. You can uh, like this video, hit that thumbs up. I greatly appreciate it. It helps me curate the content better for you guys, the viewers. Hit that subscribe button. Become a part of the Mose Knows family. Listen, once you're part of the fam, I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Catch you next time. See you in the next episode. Peace.